From the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Yeah, no, I mean, that meant a lot, Von's helped me through a lot over these last couple of years. So I remember rookie year, he had been constantly talking to me and helping me through growing pains. This last year, everything that I've been through the last couple of months, he's been there for me. So, that meant a lot. I think we've become closer over my span here. And obviously, I just want to maximize my potential on the field and, kind of be that household name that he is for the Broncos here also, and kind of, help lead a team and do all those things that he's so great at. And so I think, following in his footsteps in that aspect is something that would be very beneficial to me and the team. So I'm definitely excited that, that he sees something in me, and it's my job to, obviously take that, but then also, keep grinding and push harder. Because, I got to prove it on the field. So.
All right, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. There's Noah Fant talking about how Von Miller sees him as his favorite player on the offensive side of the ball. And I thought it was an interesting point in there, Ben, where he said how he wants to be a household name just like Von Miller is. So I want to take that from a couple different angles. The first one is, what does it mean for the Broncos if Noah Fant is a household name this year?
Well, I think it means he's certainly exceeded his production profile the last couple of years, which, I think has been rather good. But if he's a household name like a Kelsey or a Kittle, well, that means he's ascended to that upper stratosphere, that he's some kind of superstar around the league. Now, ideally, you'd want to do that after you pay him for the second contract. But, I think it's all good. If he's doing that, that means the offense is hitting on all cylinders, or certainly they're hitting to Noah Fant on all cylinders, and that's a good thing for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, he's an all-pro, maybe at least a Pro Bowler there. And then again, what does it mean for him long term? I thought it was interesting during that press conference how he talked about how he has that expectation. And you and I had a conversation on Broncos Country Tonight, the radio show, about how there's not many guys that could be this young in the league and say, I expect to be top 5, and really carry a lot of weight. Because sometimes if a guy says, I expect to be elite, there's a little bit of like, okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of elite players. Mm-hmm. But when Noah Fant says it, we're kind of like, you better eventually become elite. That's what the Broncos sort of draft you to be.
Right, and he's got the athletic profile to make that happen. Now, you look around the league at some of these other guys, obviously Kelsey and Kittle, and Waller, that's top of the mark. But after that, it's there's kind of a next tier, and I think Noah Fant can easily ascend to the top of that. Are we saying Mike Gesicki is better? I mean, T.J. Hawkinson, is Jared Goff even going to throw them? Does Jared Goff even know the tight end exists? Has he ever played with a tight end before? Name me a Rams tight end from Jared Goff's tenure while he was over there.
Everett was pretty popular
there.
Right?
Yeah. But I'm just saying.
You're talking the fantasy guy.
I know,
here,
but I'm just saying, like Jared, was he really? He was popular there, really? What round was he drafted in your fantasy drafts again? But the point is that Jared Goff has always mostly played in 3 wide receiver, 4 wide receiver, and 1 back sets, that kind of stuff, and he really hasn't had to work with a tight end, or hasn't worked with a tight end as much as he's going to be working with one now, and so. That's going to be interesting to me to see those 2 guys come from the same team, drafted in the same class. If they can elevate their games this year, I put my money on Fant.
I do too. I love his athletic profile, as you're sort of talking about there. Now, a conversation came up for us about whether Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater actually might be better fit for Noah Fant, because some of what we have to judge these receivers on is the quarterback throwing to them. Mm-hmm. And we could say round and round, but hey, Drew Lock with the upside, if he wins the job, you're maybe looking at a franchise quarterback. But at the same time, you made a great point about Teddy Bridgewater and his history of tight ends.
Well, yeah, Teddy Bridgewater force feeds a tight end. That's his binky, man. He loves to get it down to the tight end, doesn't like to take those deep shots very often. And so if you're Noah Fant, you might see a higher volume of targets from a Teddy Bridgewater. Now, whether or not that's something you're secretly rooting for or not, I couldn't tell you. But at the end of the day, he's probably going to see more work with Teddy Bridgewater than he would with Drew Lock. Not that he didn't see plenty of work with Drew Lock last year, but it just the function of the Pat Shurmur offense and the way that Teddy Bridgewater plays the game. I mean, if Teddy does win the quarterback competition, you could see a huge year for Noah Fant.
Noah Fant says the key to his maturation is consistency. And I see that. I don't think that's the only thing that matters here for Noah Fant, but it certainly is one of the things that jumps out is if you're going to play at that kind of level, because you mentioned George Kittle, Travis Kelce, those guys play at an elite level every single game. They are unguardable most of the time when healthy. Noah Fant has that potential. Is consistency the word that jumps out to you?
I think that's consistency of something else. I think Noah Fant is making a rather veiled shot at we need to quit this quarterback carousel. I've had, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks over the last over the last 2 seasons. How about we just get one guy, he's the guy, and we roll with it? And that's the consistency I think he's talking about, an offensive consistency, a consistency in leadership, a consistency out of the quarterback, and a consistent level of play. So I don't think that it's just on Noah Fant and his personal consistency. I think he's making reference to the fact that they have had instability at the quarterback position over the last 2 years, and I think they need to get that resolved.
Yeah, consistency isn't a word that I would ever really use to describe the Broncos offense at all over the past 4 to 5 years. And that's troubling, right? And so it's the quarterback, it's the scheme. There's all sorts of things. I mean, honestly, when we say consistency, this is the first time they've had the same offensive coordinator back-to-back years in how long? I mean, that right there kind of points a little bit to not just the quarterback, but just everything about the way the offense has functioned.
Is this the first year that they've had back-to-back OCs that was the same OC since Adam Gase?
It has to be.
I think it is. And I have to go back and look because there may have been a couple of years in there where, Peyton Manning to Gary Kubiak and with that situation. But other than that, it really has been a long time since they've had just that absolute that carry forward. And they have that this year. I mean, it's not just the OC, it's the personnel. They really didn't make that many moves. Added some rookies, obviously, but they didn't make that many moves. They certainly didn't make that many moves with top-tier free agents on the offensive side of the ball. So there should be a growth and a step up as these people aren't having to learn new teammates.
There's a lot of questions. I know the questions got to Vic Fangio. The questions now to Noah Fant about 2 tight end sets. Mm-hmm. And especially if Albert Okwuegbunam can make his way back and be healthy, a lot of speed between those 2 tight ends. Tough to basically cover, but it's not exactly the scheme for what Pat Shurmur does.
Yeah, Pat Shurmur comes from the West Coast offense. He likes those compressed sets, bunch sets with trips to one side and kind of create some natural picks coming off the line. That's what he likes. 2 tight end sets is a little bit different. It's more the Shanahan, the zone, and it gives you a more balanced approach, but it's really not what Pat Shurmur coming off the Andy Reid tree is more used to, whereas the Mike Shanahan's setup is more 2 tight ends.
All right, when we come back, cornerback Ronald Darby on what he likes about the Broncos defense. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Here are Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
We can do great things. We just got to keep getting to know each other, going out there. Communication is key, and knowing our job, and knowing where to line up at, and knowing each other's tendencies. Once we get all that down, the sky's the limit for this group. Got a lot of vet players, a lot of young, talented players, and we can all run and fly around.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Cornerback Ronald Darby on what he believes the defense can accomplish in 2021. And he uses a very important word in there, and it's a word that Steve Atwater's brought up to us multiple times on the show, and that's communication. He says that's the key to the Broncos defense, specifically the secondary, but really the defense overall is communication, and that's going to take them to another level. You agree with that?
Yes. I don't know if communication is the all-encompassing word that Ronald Darby maybe thinks it is right there, but I think that's a part of or a key to understanding and having that synergy and having that collective togetherness. In being a defense. Anytime you got a zone-based defense like that, you got to understand where the soft spots are, where the seams are, and where to be able to pass off your guy. You got to be able to communicate that effectively. It's a part of that. So I think that just being out there, getting the reps together, you kind of have an innate knowledge, and you start to know where the other guys are, where they round out, where they stop their pass, or where they do. So I think that communication and is where you start. I don't know if it's a be-all, end-all, like Ronald Darby sort of made it out to be.
Okay, so through that communication, because I think about, say, the Broncos defense in 2015 and sort of the swagger that they had, I guess it came from communication, elite level of talent. So it's kind of a little bit of a combination of several things, right? If you're looking at like a pie chart, that type of thing. Now I want pie. But anyways, I'd say that for communication, like what percentage of that pie would you think about with that elite defense back in 2015?
Well, first of all, it's pecan pie, not pumpkin. We want to make sure we're 100% clear on that. None of that pumpkin mess around here. But I think communication is more necessary in Vic Fangio's defense than it is in perhaps Wade Phillips. Wade Phillips is a pretty, to be honest with you, simple defense when all's said and done. You're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at the quarterback. You get your DBs out on an island, and they don't have to pass them off. They just got to stay with their guy. Now, you might have to yell if somebody gets past you, or you have to communicate effectively with the safety. Hey, look, this guy's faster than me. There's going to be a point where or I'm going to lose him, that kind of thing. But other than that, I don't think that communication is as necessary. I hate to say that because it comes across a little bit. It's not as necessary as it is in Vic Fangio's. Vic Fangio's is a very complex defense. There's more to it. And so I think that you really have to understand and know everybody's assignment, know where everybody's going to be, know how they're going to carry out their assignment, and know where you have to, especially if you're a safety, cover down on those other DBs or even those linebackers in some cases that are dropping back into zones.
Yeah, he talked about knowing each other's tendencies, knowing we're supposed to line up. I think that's a great point, and it kind of goes back to something Pat Surtain said about how he's learning his job, but he's learning everybody else's job there in the secondary, in part because he wants to know where they're going to be, where they're supposed to be, and he wants to come in and kind of hit the ground running. He doesn't want to be just a rookie showing up and I'm just going to focus on my little section of this and make sure I do my job right, because that's not exactly how 11 guys on defense are supposed to work.
Yeah, it's not. There's a whole team effort. And getting lined up, I mean, it's not just about the secondary, too, up front. You got to make sure you're shaded correctly. If you're a defensive lineman, you're supposed to be shaded inside the guard toward the center to occupy two blockers, and you line up directly over the guard. You only occupy one blocker. Well, now that linebacker that's shooting the gap can't get through because you didn't take care of that other blocker. So it's all 11 working together like that. It's not just the secondary, it's the guys up front too.
He also talked about how this is a corner-friendly defense. And I remember back to when Vic Fangio first got here and Derek Wolfe said it was a defensive line-friendly defense. And historically, we've always looked at Vic Fangio and talked about his work with inside linebackers. So I don't know, there's a part of me that goes like, and we know with safeties too. We know Justin Simmons is a great fit for Vic Fangio's defense. So I asked this sort of tongue-in-cheek, is there such a thing as a defense that's great for every single position?
I mean, I think everybody says every defense is great for everything, and I get your point there. And Wolfie was probably saying the same thing and trying to hype up his guy. But I do. I think it is a corner-friendly defense because the corners can save their energy. You're not chasing guys in man all over the field. You're, in a lot of times you're running these quarters or your quarter half, and so you're riding up the rails, and then you just kind of let him go to the next guy, and you're not having to burn as much gas. We saw the Broncos under Vance Joseph and Joe Woods actually kind of laid out a blueprint to beat Pat Mahomes using man. It's the one way that anybody showed how to use man. But the problem was they got gassed by the end of the game, and we saw that Pat Mahomes come back, the underhanded throw and all, but they were gassed at that point in time. Vic Fangio came out and laid the blueprint for how to slow them down in zone. And I think that's going to be more effective because your guys are going to be fresher in the fourth quarter and able to execute that game plan, whereas with man, they weren't. So it is more friendly in that sense that you're going to be fresher in the fourth quarter.
But it's also I would agree that it's friendly for the defensive line. The way that he goes at it, where he's trying not. Now, last year was a little bit of an exception where he had to send extra guys, but Vic Fangio wants to get home with his front four. It was only because of his injuries, basically, that he had to send Alexander Johnson more times than any off-the-ball linebacker all season for around the league. So you do think that for cornerbacks, and especially for a guy like Ronald Darby, who historically has had problems with interceptions. He's great at PBUs. He gets a lot of pass breakups, but for a team that needs to turn the corner on that, they were one of the worst teams in the league at getting interceptions. They need to find a way to improve that stat this year. So maybe Ronald Darby's onto something, and maybe that's something we can see, including from his game.
It was interesting they brought in Darby, a guy who was actually very succinctly not known for generating turnovers. He's got disruptive hands and knocks the ball, but, he's not really a guy that gets turnovers very often in this league, and that honestly has been the knock on him outside of maybe a little bit of health issues here or there. So that is interesting, and they do need to generate more turnovers. That defense is going to have to in order to make sure this team is at optimal competitive levels. But this defense does allow you to read and react on the quarterback a little bit more, and that's how you generate those turnovers, specifically if you have a rangy athletic safeties. The corners a little less so, but hopefully Ronald Darby can do that. Hopefully he can hang on to the ball a little bit this year. He'll get opportunities, certainly.
The good news for the Broncos, though, of course, is the heavy investment in that position. So they do have options, and if they feel like somebody, maybe like Pat Surtain's coming along faster, maybe Usang Bassi takes a big step forward, Michael Ojemudia, they have options even behind what's considered their starters. It feels as though like the Broncos could say, well, we need more productivity in getting interceptions. Maybe we're going to have to mix it up a little bit. That'll be kind of interesting to see how that goes. When we come back, we're going to talk about leadership. Von Miller, Cortland Sutton, two of the pillars in the locker room. We'll get to it next.
I remember a couple of years ago, we were talking about leadership. Like, could Von be a leader? Could this and that? And just every year is just so much more that you just evolve to, and you just start to notice and you start to pick up. And, I guess that just comes with, playing the league 11 years. If I got a guy coming in my team, I want to reach out to him. I want to make him feel like, hey, like, this is your team. We want you here. That can only bring positive stuff. It's true. It's real. And I want the guys to come in here and feel comfortable so they can go in here and compete. When they compete, we do good. And if the Broncos doing good, I'm doing good. So we're all kind of tied into this thing together. And, I just want to win and compete. We lost to the Kansas City Chiefs 5 years in a row. I want to change it. I try to change it. And, you got to be a great teammate. You got to be a great leader to get us over the hump.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Von Miller on talking about leadership there, talking about reaching out to players that the team acquires. It's an interesting point when we're talking about the leadership of the locker room, because it's gone through several changes. Now, Von has been pretty consistent. He sort of took the torch from DeMarcus Ware when Ware eventually retired, and he's kind of been the guy that the defense looks to. And we found out last year, as it turns out, the entire locker room looks to Von Miller as a little bit of a beacon of leadership. And even Melvin Gordon cited that as one of the reasons why they started flat.
Well, yeah, and he's been one of the longest tenured Broncos, but I think he's more the hype man, for this defense, the Flavor Flav to Justin Simmons, Chuck D.
And there's a personality there.
If this were Public Enemy, which might be the great nickname for this defense. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, guys. I think that, Justin has been kind of the lyrical leader in terms of vocal leadership. Now, it hasn't been through the media, but in the locker room, he has kind of been that guy, whereas Von Miller's kind of been the hype man. He's been the guy out front. He's been the guy that maybe gets more of the attention and has the sound bites and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it's the marriage of both those guys that really helps run that locker room. And so, Von has been a guy that when his presence isn't there, it's noticed. Last year they didn't have that hype man. They didn't have the guy. And you said it. Gordon said they came out flat. Well, that's a byproduct of not having your hype man.
So let's take it from the hype man angle on that. I think that's kind of fun. So from a hype man angle, if Von Miller is indeed, this is his last year here with the team, who's taking over that role?
Well, you've got to find somebody who is going to be that person. You have to, who's going to grow into that role? Ray Lewis was kind of that guy. That's not to say a hype man is not empty, it's not empty platitudes. You got a production to be a hype man. But Ray Lewis was that guy for the Baltimore Ravens, and they kind of fell off a little bit when he left. But Ed Reed kind of grew, kind of came into that role. There were other guys that grew into that role. You got to have someone grow into that role, someone who has to be the motivational leader in a lot of ways. And if Von's not going to be here, that's tough. Shelby Harris has a gregarious personality. You'd think maybe he could kind of navigate that. Bradley Chubb is a little bit more of a stern leader, in that, but maybe he can become the guy. Maybe they draft somebody who eventually becomes that guy. We don't know. Or maybe
Will Parks was a little bit of that.
Will Parks was a little bit of that too. K-Jack, a little bit of that.
But also in last year, right?
Right. Whereas I would say other guys, like for instance Justin or Bradley Chubb, are a little more quiet, a little more serious in terms of their leadership. So you had to have somebody kind of become that guy, grow into that role, and I don't know who that's going to be. Maybe Draymond Jones has a big year and he kind of grows into that. Although I tend to think he's more on the Justin and Bradley side of things.
But it's okay to have different kinds of leaders. And I do like how we're talking about guys from the recent draft classes that are stepping into that role. And we know Bradley Chubb and Cortland Sutton, when they got here, that was a big deal to them. They wanted to step almost immediately into that kind of leadership role. And so now you have a situation where Bradley Chubb's going to probably be back. I would be really shocked if anything happens there. Cortland Sutton, I think, is probably going to be back as well. But yeah, Von Miller, knowing his impact on this organization, we have to have real conversations about what that looks like and how the locker room more or less moves on from that. They weren't ready for it last year. They're going to get him back this year. If things go well, maybe you decide to extend him and maybe there's an opportunity there. I feel as though for Von, I think the conversation about what it would take for them to bring him back for another year, what is he looking for in this scenario too?
Well, he's got to, in order to come back, he's probably going to have a double-digit sack season. He's probably going to have to, return to the level of productivity that he had 2 and 3 years ago.
But it's not impossible to think.
It's not impossible. It's not even improbable. It's just a question that he has to. And then that said, the money. You can't pay Von Miller, $25 million a year anymore, just even with that productivity profile. So he would have to take a haircut in terms of what it is that he would be willing to accept financially. Probably a deal that's closer to $15 million per year, $18 million per year with some incentives loaded in there on top of it to, and escalators to keep the level of performance up. And that's not to say that pass rushers can't be productive well into their 30s. Look at Dwight Freeney, you know, recently as a guy who played up to like 38 years old. So, but I think if Von's going to stick around, he's got to improve the productivity profile back to premier levels or just below premier levels, and then be willing to take not necessarily a hometown discount, but a team-friendly deal with maybe some performance boosters in there that did kind of help mitigate some of that cap.
I'll add one more thing in there. I think the team has to be trending in the direction that makes him want to come back. You just saw with J.J. Watt and how he asked to be released. I mean, he was Mr. Houston Texan, and I mean, as much as he's done for that community, he wanted to leave. I'd say for the Broncos, it's a combination of his productivity, which of course would help the Broncos with winning, but they have to be a team trending. I mean, even in this answer, he's talking about the Kansas City Chiefs and how he's tired of losing to the Kansas City Chiefs. 11 games in a row, you've lost to the Chiefs. It sort of feels like he's kind of calling his shot here a little bit. Like, as a leader, I'm saying we're either going to get through this together, or maybe I am looking at a different or an uncertain future.
Yeah, and I think that's all very realistic. I think with Von Miller, you know, it's they need to see that this team is taking a massive step back toward becoming what they need to be. Now, over the last few years, they've had offensive shortcomings. It hasn't necessarily been a fault of Von Miller's, but you know, they paid Von Miller a lot of money. In fact, the money that they paid Von Miller has really precluded them from going out and paying a quarterback. Keeping cheap quarterbacks, keeping the offense cost effective has allowed them to pay Von Miller. So there's a reciprocity there that Von Miller needs to be able to be the guy that carries the team when the offense can't at times this year.
I think it's really well said. All right, that does it for us. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thank you for watching Broncos Country Tonight.